Hi, I like comic books. Do you want to know how much I like comic books?
This much. And it's hard not to, because according to some people, and by some people I mean myself, so according to myself, comic books are considered one of the highest forms of art and storytelling. I mean, look around. Look at all these characters. Look at all these stories. All vivid reflections of the different kinds of lives we've lived, representing our capacity to love, to harm, to feel, and fight.
You finished, old man! You don't get it, son. This isn't a mud hole. It's an operating table. And I'm the surgeon.
And out of that contradiction against unfathomable odds, it's you, only you, that emerged to distill so specific a form from all that chaos. It's like turning air into gold. A miracle.
Dreams save us. Dreams lift us up and transform us into something better. And on my soul, I swear that until my dream of a world where dignity, honor, and justice are the reality we all share, I'll never stop fighting. Ever.
Did that work? That was supposed to brainwash you into liking comic books as much as I do. Did it work? Anything? No? God fucking damn. It's funny to think that all of this, including stuff like this, can all be achieved with just some pen and some paper. And although that sounds simple enough, it's actually quite more complex than one might think. The comic book industry has thousands of contributors, so it's vast in its creativity. But that also means that it's very high in its competitiveness, because at the end of the day, they're a business. They're trying to sell you this stuff. And of course, because of the success of comic books, there are now a bunch of old white men who are responsible for what today exists as billion-dollar industries. So let's say you want a piece of this fortune, right? You want to contribute to the industry. You want to make your mark. Obviously, you have questions, right? Like, where would I even start? What would I have to do? What opportunities could the comic book industry possibly have to offer me, right? Luckily, I have a name for you that can answer all those questions simultaneously. And that name is Todd McFarlane. Todd would flourish in almost every single field in comic books because he would summarize the goal of his project with just one phrase. And that phrase was to
put sexy into it. I don't invent anything new, I just put sexy in it. And you get a lot of credit.
My man Todd perfectly encapsulates what it means to take full advantage of the comic book industry. This is Make It Sexy, the Todd McFarlane story. Todd was born and grew up right here in Calgary, Alberta. Todd was one of those stereotypical kids that was randomly doodling on any piece of paper that he could find. But then Todd's vision became way more focused when he discovered comic books. He became totally obsessed. He would spend a lot of time in his family's trailer trying to perfect his craft. When Todd was at an age where he was finally trying to look for some work, that's when he started to get on that grind mindset. And what I mean by this is he started submitting his work to comic book editors everywhere, digging for any opportunity he could find. And when I say everywhere, I mean everywhere, not just DC and Marvel. There was First Comics, Eclipse Comics, Pacific Comics, Red Circles, you name it. If they made comic books, then Todd was sending them submissions. In fact, Todd actually did focus on drawing these less popular characters from these publishers because he thought they were more likely to hire him. 700 samples. 700. 300 rejection letters, the other 400 never got back to him. Until one day in 1984, Todd was hired onto his first comic book, which was Coyote. But they didn't even need him drawing Coyote, they needed him drawing a backup story within the comic. And during his second issue, the comic was canceled anyway, so he was officially employed for 4 months only. Like with any career, there's just dumb luck. And just when Todd thought he was in, he was out. But his luck would soon change again. A year later, 1985, Infinity Incorporated, the artist who worked on it, died. That's an opening. Todd is hired. He worked on that for a couple years until he was asked to work on a little comic called The Incredible Hulk. Another year goes by working on the Hulk, and now with this tiny little portfolio of work experience he's got going on, a pretty big opportunity knocked at his door. Because Marvel would then hire him onto another comic. And of course, that comic was... Ow, fuck! Why'd you throw it so hard, man? During the late 80s, Spider-Man was in a bit of a rut. He was still Marvel's most popular character by far, but that was fading and so were the sales. A large reason for this was because Spider-Man was getting close to entering the 90s, all while still being drawn and looking like it's from the 70s. The stories were evolving, but not the look. And people tend to forget that the art can be one of the main contributors to whether or not people buy comic books or not. Marvel had yet to realize this. They were still following a very strict formula. So when Todd was hired onto Spider-Man, there were certain expectations to what Marvel was looking for. But Todd had proved himself nonetheless. He showed efficiency and he showed speed. In the comic book industry, when you're pumping out a new issue every month, these are the kinds of things that matter the most when you're hiring more artists. But of course, Marvel had yet to realize that they just hired an ambitious shit disturber. Soon enough, he would be the ones telling the professionals how things should be done. And with that out of the way, let's finally start actually talking about comic books. Don't tell my dad. Seriously, no narking. Swear to God. Found them. So Todd had just convinced Marvel to hire him because of how quick and efficient he was. But now that he was hired, that's when Todd started being a little bit of a shit disturber. This is when he would start incorporating a lot of that flair, which is what made him the famous artist that he is today. Todd would ask the very simple question that if we're in the 90s, why are we still drawing Spider-Man like he's in the 70s? We should be drawing Spider-Man like he's in the 90s. For Todd, this meant exaggerating everything as much as possible, blowing things out of proportion to be extremely dynamic. For starters, the eyes on Spider-Man's mask were massive. Todd drew him in a way that the lenses almost took up the entirety of the space on the mask. All the muscles and creases on Spidey's body were caked in this cross-hatching technique, making the form appear ultra-detailed and defined. Todd also took the idea of Spider-Man's agility and flexibility and pushed it to its limits. He twisted his body every which way and most notably loved to take Spidey's legs and prop them up beside his head. Of course, some of these poses didn't even make sense in an anatomical sense, but it looked fucking awesome and that's what mattered. Probably one of the most iconic parts of Todd McFarlane's illustrations of Spidey was the webbing. Before Todd came along, all the webs being shot out of Spider-Man's web shooters were extremely linear. The webbing was flat, it was 2D, it was shooting right off the edge of the panel, and usually the easiest way to depict it would be two strands, two lines, followed by a bunch of X's in between the two of them. Todd took this and flipped it on its ass. His webbing was weaving over and under and all around all the limbs. Todd was using way more expressive and excessive line to portray the webs. It would eventually be dubbed spaghetti webbing, coming from the mouth of a Marvel executive who was displeased from Todd's visual interpretation of Spider-Man. All of these stylistic choices that Todd was making were getting him pulled into so many meetings. The suits would be constantly nagging him, saying things like, "Why are you drawing it this way? Why don't you just draw him the way that we want you to?" Because for Marvel, this is Spider-Man, right? This is their baby, this is their golden child, Marvel's moneymaker. They don't want anyone messing with Spider-Man. If it worked before, why wouldn't it work now? But the first thing they didn't understand was that Todd wasn't trying to mess with anything. He was simply doing something different to survive as a starving artist. And on top of that, it was a lonely profession. He was merely trying to entertain himself. He was doing what almost every single illustrator has encountered in their life, where you look at your work and you go, how do I make this look cooler? What can I do to make this sick as fuck? I mean, just listen to the guy when he's drawing.
So we're going to give him a big fat head. We're going to do the cool profile, sort of a big smile. The other cow up over here. There's the other cow. I'll fill it in. Bam. So we'll give him some cool teeth. Right, so it looks like he can beat somebody up. And click back to white, and now we're going to add a little bit of the sexy to it, right? I'll do a bad hand.
Little did Todd know is that his decisions were already way more influential than he would ever imagine. It should be around here somewhere. Oh, Cole, back in the garage. Hey, Cole.
Yo.
What?
Hey, can you show them the thing?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, just okay. So this is Spider-Man issue 300. It came out in 1988. At this point, Spider-Man was rocking his black and white costume, which debuted in Secret Wars 4 years earlier. Alright, thanks, man. That's great, thank you. A little dim, isn't he?
Huh?
Nothing. You're good.
During his time working on issue 300, Todd would compromise with Marvel about the use of the black suit, because he hated the black suit. For him, it was like making Batman's costume yellow. It just didn't make sense to him. So through reasoning, Todd would make it so that Spider-Man would go back to rocking the red and blue, while the black suit would come off of him and become its own new villain, rocking this new design he whipped up involving this really dreadful, evil smile. Yeah, and I'm not sure what happened after that. Maybe he ends up becoming one of the most iconic supervillains of all time? Maybe he, I don't know, gets 2 movies where he's being played by an A-list actor? I don't know. Either way, Todd's teenager logic was winning the battle against the suits, because he was starting to sell Spider-Man comics again. You know, people really liked what they were seeing. But this small success wasn't enough for Todd. He was extremely ambitious. He was so tired of being restricted and controlled, he wanted to go off and write his own comic books. Marvel Comics, however, seeing all this money that's starting to roll in, compromised with Todd as a way to continue making money off of him. They sat him down and they said, "Do you want to write and draw your own run of Spider-Man?" Who isn't gonna take that deal? It's Spider-Man! So Marvel ended up giving Todd his own adjectiveless run of Spider-Man. It wasn't the Amazing Spider-Man, it was just Spider-Man. This is it right here. And Marvel definitely made the right move. Because to this day, this is still one of the greatest selling comic books of all time. Its debut in 1990 sold 2.5 million copies. However, with all the success, Todd was still heavily criticized. Critics would call his writing shallow, unsophisticated, and pretentious. His stories were deemed too dark for the expected lighthearted tone of Spider-Man, so Todd would end up doing 15 issues of his run of Spider-Man before leaving Marvel indefinitely to go off on his own. But before I tell you what Todd did after he left Marvel, I'm gonna give some of my fellow illustrators some comic book art tips from Todd McFarlane. Oh yeah, this is my interpretation of the average comic book artist. Tip number 1, know your strengths. When Todd began his career, do you think he knew how to draw backgrounds or feet? Hell no. But what Todd did have was a degree in graphic design. He used that knowledge to consistently steer your attention away from the things that were lacking in technical skill, and drew your eye to the things that he was good at while he improved on those weaknesses. Tip number 2, the ballpark. The ballpark is referring to anatomy. McFarlane has said himself that there's a ton of artists who definitely do anatomy better than him. But once you've got the basics down, you're just trying to achieve a believability where someone's not going to look at it and go, well, that looks weird. There's a limit to how far you can push anatomy, but as long as you're riding that edge like Todd did, then people will believe whatever they want to see. Tip number 3 is clarity. Clarity is referring to the idea that you should be able to go up to a 70-year-old woman, hold this up for 2 seconds, bring it back down, and ask her, what did you see? She should be saying something like, I saw a very important man at a desk. If she says that, then boom, you've got clarity down. Tip number 4 is my favorite because it acts as the blueprint for how Todd is able to achieve that dynamic look in his drawings. I'm just gonna let Todd explain this one.
Here's what our big goal is in comic book. You have a 2D piece of paper. That means it's flat. And what happens if I now take webbings and I put webbings back behind him? It goes through his leg, comes back up and around here. I create this sense of volume. The moment I put an arm in front, I've created a plane. And then if I turn my hand and I break it down at an angle and I do something with my fingers, I've created 7 or 8 more planes. Then what happens if I turn and I put my hand back behind it? So I've got foreground, midground, background. But then what happens if I'm doing Spider-Man and I put the foot up on top of it? Take 2D and create as much depth as you can, and you're going to be a hell of a comic book artist.
All right, now that you got 4 tips from a master himself, you're halfway to being a famous comic book creator yourself. Hey, stop getting distracted. Oh, I still have so much more to tell you. I still have yet to tell you about Image. So after Todd left Marvel, he realized that it was the artists that make the comic books what they are. They're the ones holding the power. So he opted to unionize with fellow artists. It was also because of the criticism that Todd received during his run of Spider-Man. He had visions of creating a comic book publisher that would grant artists the power that he sought out when he worked on Spider-Man, where he could freely write as well as draw his own comics. And of course, on top of that, there's also a known history of comic book creators getting their creations taken away from them. Bob Kane is often credited as the sole creator of Batman. However, it was Bill Finger that transformed Batman from this to this. Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, creators of the champion of the oppressed himself, Superman, were paid a mere $130 goddamn dollars in 1938 for the rights to the character, leaving both of them to fight to reclaim the copyright for the rest of their lives. They both ended up dying in desperate poverty. Todd McFarlane, rightfully so, was afraid of history repeating itself. He would rally together his fellow artists, and all of them would bet on themselves, risk their entire careers, and leave Marvel with their middle fingers held up high. The 7 of them accounted for 44 of the top 50 selling books of 1991 out of 8,000 books. That's who was leaving Marvel. They were the elite of the elite. And not to be so on the nose, but it was literally like the Justice League or the Avengers coming together for the first time. It was magical. Todd would co-create Image Comics in 1992 with these 6 other comic book legends. We got Eric Larson, we got Will Portacio, Mark Silvestri, we have Jim Valentino, Jim Lee, and Rob Liefeld. And this is where I want to emphasize that back in the day, comic book artists had rock star status. It wasn't until names like Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, and Jim Lee that comic book artists became the face of their own work and could sell comic books just by having their name attached to it. Hell, you know who was one of the first major fans of Image Comics? Eazy-E.
The minute he walks in, I'm like, that's Eazy-E. Holy crap. He's coming to me. He's coming right to me. He's like, hey Rob, what's up, man? It's Eric, how you doing? And I was like, hi? And he's like, yo man, big fan, man.
And these guys didn't go back on their word. To this day, Image Comics does not own the comics they publish. They are strictly creator owned. The trademark and copyright of these works are wholly owned by the original creator. Todd finally had that freedom that he had always wanted, so he started work on his original character and story. And when word got around that Todd frickin' McFarlane is writing and drawing his own comic book, yeah, it drew a lot of people in. Todd had successfully detached himself from the property and made a name for himself. So, what did Todd create in this first year of having all this creative freedom? Well, wait, are you kidding? I swear I brought it back from Vancouver. Oh my god, are you kidding me? Alright, so this guy is Spawn. During that time when Image Comics was first gaining traction, Todd pulled an old sketch of Spawn out of the archives, pitching it to his friends with the intention of giving the character his own comic book series. The sketch was drawn by Todd when he was 16. This dude took his high school OC and made him a famous comic book character. I really need to emphasize the irony of this thing. I want you to envision your high school original characters right now and picture giving them their own comic book series. Like, for example, I got this guy right here, Armeos, who's literally just a combination of the word Armageddon and chaos. Now imagine me taking that character and having the tools to be able to give him his own comic book series or animation or movie. That's just wild. It's especially wild when Todd actually did that. Spawn was the 1990s young reader's wet dream. It was dark, it was horrific, it was unforgiving, it tackled adult themes, zero censorship, ultra grotesque detail, hyper violence, chains, spikes, blood, bugs. It was basically the heavy rock metal of comic books. It was this edginess that attracted audiences. Upon its release in 1992, Spawn number 1 sold 1.7 million copies, which remains a record for an independent comic book. With now over 340 issues counting, Spawn remains one of the longest running creator-owned series ever. Alright, I'm gonna put all this away before my dad catches me in the act. Okay, I admit it. Maybe you're not convinced about Image and their success, because you've never heard of Spawn, why should you care? So let me try again. Do you recognize this?
School where you be surrounded by your peers to master the deadly arts.
No? Have you heard of this? No? Have you heard of this? How about this?
Son of a bitch!
Maybe this?
I wasn't ready before. Now I am.
All of these properties were originally published by Image Comics. Because of what he started, he's responsible for making these things become what they are today. He gave these creatives the freedom and security they needed to fully realize their visions. Thank you, Todd McFarlane. Everything I've told you so far is only a fraction of Todd's entire career. And although I'd love to talk about it in detail, I'm sure I'm already making Sarah nervous with the current length of this video. So what I will briefly tell you is that in the mid-90s, the comic book industry made some very poor business decisions, and the industry as a whole began to collapse. Todd basically had to figure out other ways to generate revenue, because of the possibility that comic book creators would be out of a job. This era saw McFarlane take more risks than ever before. And it also marked the beginning of Todd trying to maintain Spawn's relevance by putting him everywhere. Todd founded his own film and animation studio, Todd McFarlane Entertainment, where he would go on to produce a live-action Spawn movie, and although it's one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my entire life, it did produce $100 million at the box office. And then he made an animated Spawn TV series, which lasted a few seasons. From 1995 to 2003, we got 6 Spawn video games, and more recently, Spawn appeared as a playable character in both Mortal Kombat and Call of Duty. However, he found his biggest success was something less Spawn-related. Toys. McFarlane Toys is now known to be one of the most popular distributors for DC action figures. It's hard for me to not admire the balance of Todd's career as one of the most influential comic book artists of all time, while also being indirectly responsible for producing a lot of the media we consume today, and riding out that success as long as possible by branching out as much as he can. He's a hustler at heart, and I respect that. Todd McFarlane is what happens when you're both the stupidest and the smartest person in the room. You take risks, you make dodgy decisions, you get lucky, then boom, you made it. And he's just some guy. He's just like you and me. He just likes to draw cool shit. He literally built an empire from nothing. It's really quite a spectacle, and although I'm not usually the type to be patriotic, Todd does make me proud to be a Canadian. He loves what he does. He fights for it, he's persistent, he perseveres, he endures. He doesn't give up. I hope you had a fun time watching this video. I hope it inspired you to be a shit disturber, to disrupt the status quo, to make things sexy. And now, I'll leave you with some wise words from Todd McFarlane. And what better way to conclude this than to hear it from the man himself? Hey guys, I'm here in Calgary, Alberta. I'm in the office of Mr. Todd McFarlane himself. And I just wanted to say, Todd, thank you for, putting aside some time to talk to me today. Damn. You thought I was just going to be able to get Todd McFarlane just like that? Yeah, no, not happening. Oh yeah, the video's over. We're done. And of course, that comic was.
That was so shit. I was just so happy. Sorry, my bad. That was so good.
You're overjoyed.
As soon as I said it, I was like,